The book of Ruth, chapter 2. We're going to read verses 1 through 7, since it's a paragraph. That is my goal. To play on words, I won't give you that later. Verse 1. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I might find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come on a portion of a field belonging to Boaz, who was of a family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." How would you like your boss to say that to you? And you respond back. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant in charge of the reapers answered and said, "She is a young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. Now, before we do anything, and we read through it quite quickly, I want us to learn to go here and say, what little things can I pull out? Make some observations. What kind of interesting things can you see here that can be touched upon? And since Mark willfully raised his hand quickly, go ahead, Mark. Okay.
I know from having read the already that later on, he approached and maybe that was
What else? What other kind of? And what we're doing here, this is kind of really easy Bible study. We're reading the text and taking out from the text some observations we're making. Can they be right or wrong? They can only be right because we're just seeing what it says here. Okay, so Boaz knew his employees. Had some kind of a relationship. That may be an assumption. We can't go upon that. Or she might have been dressed differently, Moabite versus Israelite. Nicole. Very good. Ruth asked permission. Isn't that kind of interesting? I mean, think about that. How often would you go to your mother-in-law, guy or a gal, go to your mother-in-law and say, "Can I do such and such?" But it does show the submissiveness of the character. Or she was a Moabite at a place. Maybe she's offering some advice from her what to do. But I think she's familiar with, we're going to get into the agricultural requirements in Israel. I think she was familiar with what was to do. Relationship of Ruth and... Oh, I was waiting for that one. Ruth was a worker. How's that? She got there from the morning and she's still there in the evening. That's pretty interesting. Unpaid, I might add. She was gleaning. We'll discuss that in a minute. That's it. It was just a lean-to, basically, yeah. What other observations? What? Is he called? Yeah, we just call it a lean-to, but it's the same thing. Boaz had a good reputation. Well, we'll find out more about that. Good reputation. What else? There's about at least 30 more observations. It's really easy. Read it, look down at your text, and pull it out. Now, very good. Boaz, you guys are missing the key to this whole thing. Boaz is kin. Not yet. He's kinsman. Different word. Don't jump. Oh, we're going to play with that. You guys find that in verse 3. And those have the NASB. Does it say something in the side column on the NASB? Does it give you a better translation? Perchance chanced upon. We're going to play with this. But basically, Ruth, as it turned out, coincidence. Ha! We'll put verse 3. We'll deal with this. Go ahead. What else? Boaz plus did this, plus, what is this? Plus this, plus this, plus this, owned a field. And we'll have to discuss that too, because he didn't own the whole acreage kind of thing. Boaz, conveniently, is from city. Well, we'll do that. City of David. City of David. House of bread. I was waiting for that. Find favor. Anybody knows what that means? This is Old Testament. She wants to be graced. Actually, we could put it graced out. She wants to be graced out. Interesting. You guys see that? That they both uses that the same capital. When Lord is all in italics, we discussed this Sunday night. For two of us over here, three of us. They were using that name of God, which is kind of interesting. It was not normal speech pattern to use that. Okay, shift gears for a second. We made some observations. Instead, now look at it and see some background you might need to understand this. A doctrinal background you might need to understand some of this. What would you look for? What would you, if you went to go look at something? Okay, well, hang on. We got to know about gleaning. We have to understand what? You guys got to learn to write faster. Okay. I'm getting reprimanded. That's not good. Somebody pause tape. What were you saying about the clan? Okay. We have to examine lineage or genealogy. You got to understand kinsmen. Yeah, I got to understand favor. Very good. Since we just discussed that, what else? Since there was workers involved in employee-employee relationships, what were they like in Israel? And I'll just give you a little hint. We got to understand something about slavery. And since I've got the play on words already, then there's going to be man's responsibility, God's sovereignty. No, I'm trying to get this pen to write, to be honest. I can write smaller. These pens, it's like writing on a what do you call it? Teflon pan. Okay, that's enough for right now. Okay. Well, that's why I put this here. Man's responsibility. I'm playing off of this, God's sovereignty, because man will say, "Oh man, it just happened." God will say, "Really, really." You know, it's kind of hard because we're playing different positions here. Most of you guys are reading ahead, which is good. So you've read through the book of Ruth a couple times. Maybe you looked at different things and you say, I already know the end of the story. Well, Ruth and Boaz and all them are living the story. So when they're saying something like verse 3, You understand? To them, it was just happened. It was a normal flow of life. It just happened. When you're going through things, when you first met that special someone or something, you say, it just happened. One rainy, September night or whatever you want to say. It just happened. But no, God was behind it. What they're trying to do, the writer's trying to do is weave into the story, the narrative, that God's totally in control of everything, even this. And notice here, we can put this under observations. And nobody said it, so I'll say it. Ruth is called what? Not a Jew. How many times does the writer keep reminding you as a reader, Ruth is a Moab. Ruth is a Moab. It's kind of funny because I'm doing stuff for preparing for Sunday nights, and I'm got 1 Kings on my mind. And it's funny, one of the wives that Solomon married was a Moab. He didn't learn nothing from the story either. But we'll get into that another time. But everything was okay with Solomon. Come on. We're not going to go there. Solomon wanted it. He did it, man. After Solomon, there was no real official skirt chaser. He won. So, anyway, let's bring us up to the speed now. In verse 1, it says, now Naomi, now is a conjunction. So obviously this paragraph starts in verse 22 of chapter 1. If any of you have a chapter break, you'd probably see it there. It says, so Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess. You know what I like to do? Especially in small books, is take colored pencils. You know the box of colored pencils? And something that constantly repeats itself. Color in all the same words. I haven't done it in this Bible, but I've been messing around with the Bible I got at home. Moabitess, like pink or something. And I'll just stand right out and say, wow, I can see, and make yourself a little guide up in the space or something. It's kind of interesting because, again, the writer says, the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned with from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, at the beginning of the barley harvest, let me give you, since we're at this particular point, let me try and give you, I thought I had it somewhere in here. Hang on just a second. Don't wait up. Keep a light on. Somewhere in here I got a chart of, I might not. But it began in the month of Nisan. Anybody familiar with what the month of Nisan is? Oh, I'm sorry. Say that. I heard two of you at the same time. All I heard was Passover. It's the Passover season. Nisan 1 begins the Hebrew calendar. Nisan is equivalent to our late March, early April period. And I'm not going to find what I want here. All right. Be that way. We'll get home and, oh, there it is. Oh, I found it. There it is. Snake. Let's do this. Write this down if you want, just so you can get an idea, and you can even write right there in the paragraph next to your Bible what this is. Nisan 1 marked the first day of the calendar year. It was a fast for Nadab and Abihu. Anybody remember a story about Nadab and Abihu? They were the sons of Aaron who got fried for going into the tabernacle with the wrong attitude, basically. So they came back out and God put them to death. The 10th day, there was a selection of the Paschal lamb. So the 10th day, people went around checking for the lamb without spot, without blemish, to take home. It's kind of interesting, just so you'll know where this started. Go to Exodus. Hold your finger, Ruth. Go to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. Just so I can show you the identification process, because we didn't cover this at all Sunday night, so if you weren't here Sunday night, tie this into Sunday night's little thing on Exodus, and you'll see it's kind of interesting. Exodus 12, verse 3. We'll start in verse 3, and I want you to just underline these specific words, and you'll see how it jumps out. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. So on the 10th day of the month, they would go around, and let's say your house had 15 people. You may need 2 lambs of a certain size. Depends how much you eat. If your family is 2 or 3 people, you might want to go get one lamb between the families, but you would go out and select a lamb. Notice what it says, a lamb. Now, verse 4, now if the household is too small for the lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons, according to each man, and they are to divide the what? Is it a lamb anymore? It's what lamb? The lamb. Now it becomes specific. It was very general before. Go to the flock and find a lamb. So they would go in there searching for a lamb. When they found a lamb and said, this is it, pulled it in, it became the lamb. Kind of interesting so far, remember? Jesus is called the Lamb of God. Okay? Then it goes on. Verse 5 says, your lamb. Now you're identified with that lamb. Kind of interesting, isn't it? You shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. So the next thing on the calendar of the 14th was the Paschal lamb is killed in the evening. Passover begins. The next day, the 15th, is the first day of unleavened bread, which is a 7-day feast. After sunset, a sheaf of barley is brought to the temple. So they're at the barley harvest, which is the next day. 16th is the first fruits sheaf offered. Harvest begins from this date to 50 days until the Feast of Pentecost. The 22nd is the close of Passover, end of the unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The 26th is a fast for the death of Joshua. So you get the sort of a calendar flow. Pardon me? 15th, first day of unleavened bread. 16th, first fruits sheaf offered. Harvest begins. From this date is 50 days until the Feast of Pentecost. Not in where? No. Well, it is, but you just gotta... I'm putting it all together for you. Actually, it's in Leviticus also. But if you notice, if it says in verse 22 of chapter 1, at Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, when do you think she walked into Bethlehem? I would say the 16th or 17th. Beginning of the harvest. During the Passover season. Kind of interesting. Again, what I said before, it can't be dogmatic, but just make it a little dramatic, because her great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson is hung upon the cross on Passover. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Because I think the author wants you to know, he could have left it out. Was it necessary to know that it's barley harvest? Other to know she's going to go glean. Now, since we talked about that for a second, let's talk about what it means to have agriculture, what the agricultural process is in Israel. Sort of doing this a little out of order, but I want to give you this before we walk into verse 1. Because I want you to know what's going to happen, that everything that happens there is according to an order. You know, God's not a God of chaos. And when God sets up certain order and certain laws for you to obey, if you're obedient to it, everything falls into place. Okay, so here's where we begin. The Israelites learned farming. So if you're making a title for this or you're doing anything, just write down agriculture in Palestine or farming in the Promised Land, whatever you want to title it. I didn't really give it a title, and just some thoughts here kind of thing. How do you reap it? Never mind. My refrigerator. The Israelites learned farming during their 400-year stay in Egypt. Remember, they're wandering through the wilderness. They wish they had the onions and the leeks of Egypt, because Egypt was very fertile. The Nile would overflow at least once or twice a year, and the overflowing from the mineral deposits of the Nile going out just made it very fertile around the Nile River basin. And since Israel was in slavery, they learned to reap and sow and all that other good stuff in that particular area. And if you remember before that, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were what? Were they farmers? They were shepherds, sheep herders, or herdsmen, whatever you want to call it. And now when they came out, they were farmers. I'm sure they had sheep and goats too, don't get me wrong, but they were basically farmers. The allotment of land to tribes and families was an understanding that all land was actually owned by God. So when Israel divided the land, they said it's God's land, and we're going to proportion it off that God would want us to do that. And I did that chart. Remember I gave you somewhere in here, I got the land chart that shows you how proportioned, how Israel divided the lands. I know it's very bad, very light, but you can see that the different colors sort of give you the idea how the land was proportioned off and how they all had access to good fertile, not that there was any bad fertile ground, but they had the access to fertile ground. And at the year of Jubilee, anybody knows what the year of Jubilee is? Yeah, but when is it? How's that? Every 7 years. Okay, you got the Sabbath rest, which is every 7th day. Every 7th year is a Jubilee, and every 70th year is... Huh? 70. 50 is the, not 70, 50 is not the Jubilee though. Oh, you guys got me all confused now. Right. But there's to do, if they, listen, the land was to rest every 7th year. Let's just do it like this. We'll call it what we want to. Every, let's go back. Stop. Every 7th day, the land was to rest. That means you couldn't harvest, you couldn't reap, you couldn't water, you couldn't fertilize. Every 7th year, you were not to grow anything. Okay? And every 50th year, it would revert back to who owned it. But there's a different Jubilee. Because every 7th year is a Jubilee. I gotta look it up. That's not what I'm covering though, because I'll explain to you why in a minute. The land, the way they put it off, they built walls, hedges, protect animals. The land was burned off from weeds. I mean, they had people to pick up rocks. The land was cared for meticulously. God gave specific orders for the ground, for how to deal with stones, how to deal with thorns, how to sow in certain categories, how to what we call crop rotation. The first, I'm trying to remember now, 2 or 3 years of a vineyard, you couldn't harvest. Couldn't eat the fruit, do anything with it. Now how do you go 3 years without eating every fruit? People would say, I got to do it anyway. And God gave certain rules so you would have a good harvest the 4th, 5th, 6th kind of year. I don't know, I've never seen raisins grow anything, but God had rules, and I'm not a farmer, so I can't go to that extent to tell you the beneficial value of it. But I will tell you, if you listen to all this, you'll find out how when we get to Ruth, it just clicks. It's so cool. The plow was followed by men using hoes to break up the clods. In later times, harrow sorts was used, usually in the form of a thick block of wood held down by the weight of a stone of a man. Seed was sown and harrowed in at the same time. So in other words, how they did the laying of the seed, they used like a 2x4 to use it to lay the ground level at that particular time. The opposite end, just so you can give you the principal crops of Palestine, were wheat and barley. Barley came first, then wheat. Barley came first, then wheat. There was also mention that they grew lentils. I know that because every Jewish mother knows lentil soup. Flax, cucumbers, melons, beans, that kind of stuff. Hay was not used. They fed cattle barley or chopped with wheat and barley straw. The sowing of crops began on the Feast of Tabernacles. The sowing of crops began at the Feast of Tabernacles, which is sometime around what we would call harvest, October, or beginning of November when autumn rains were due, and the crops for summer and fall harvest were planted in January and February. Harvest began with barley, which ripens in Palestine 2 or 3 weeks before the wheat. The harvest began on the 15th of Nisan, which is April 16th. In our day, it's called Tax Day, April 15th. The month of Nisan really actually goes, though, and it depends on the Jewish calendar, how it fluctuates sometimes. but hours overlap. So when we say month April, we think of the 30 days, right? 30 days in April? 30 days of April. But when they say Nisan, there's the March part of April. There are months overlap. So when it says Nisan 1, don't think it's the first day. So, kind of idea. It's that period whenever it starts. So Nisan 1 may be March 20th. You understand what I'm saying? So when it says Jesus was crucified on Passover, which is April 15, Nisan 15, it wasn't April 15. That's why you see the calendars. How many times is Passover? I want to say this to be nice. Easter. The crucifix falling on the same day. Very rarely. Every year you see it's on a different day because they're trying to line up with the calendar of Nisan. I'm sorry, what was the last one? That it lined up with Passover. Yeah, but that's true. That's what it should do. I've always kind of... But we'll have to discuss that when we do the life of Christ again anyway. It's more accurate to what we talk about biblically sometimes. Sometimes, because again, that year's from 4 BC to about 6 AD was kind of really out of whack. So, grain was harvested with a sickle, although it was known that the grain was harvested by pulling up the roots to preserve the straw. The cut grain was gathered in the arms, bound in sheaves, and laid in heaps to be threshed. Threshing floors were placed in the open air, leveled and trampled hard, usually on an elevated ground, so that the winnowing process, the wind would carry off the chaff. Threshing was done by oxen driven over the grain to tread out the kernels with their hoofs. Sometimes machines were used, made with planks, which dragged across the threshing floor. Winnowing was done in the evening when there was more breezes. The mass of the chaff, straw, and grain was tossed into the air with shovels so that the chaff might be blown away. The chaff and stubble of the fields were burned. The grain was sifted and stored. Now, with that in mind, Israel owed its possession to the land to God. Its fertility was also in God's hand. The Lord made a number of provisions in the law to care for the land. Now, I want to say this because as you look at the life of Boaz, Boaz loved the Lord. What's he going to do then? He's going to obey. First thing is, Sabbath rest was obeyed. We talked about that. The soil was laid fallow for the 7th year and the 50th year. 2 jubilees. How's that? It was forbidden to yoke an ox and a donkey together, since the ox was a clean animal and the donkey was unceremonially clean. Of course, if you would do that, since the donkey is what? Always right? Left. It would always be going. Never mind. I didn't hear you. What? Oh, good. Not talking about that today, but that's good. Check it. It was forbidden to sow with mingled seed or with seed which had the carcass of a forbidden animal had been lain. In other words, if you got a bag of seed and a dead animal had been there the day before and you cleaned up the mess and then threw the seed bags down, you couldn't use that seed bag. Or if, for instance, your dog that was out with you that day laid against the seed bag and dropped dead, couldn't use the seed. You couldn't use mixed seed. You know, ever get seed and all of a sudden, where'd that come from? It's probably in the seeds I planted. And they couldn't do that. They'd have to. The corners, this is where it gets really important now. The corners of all fields were not to be reaped and was left for gleaners, which were the poor people, to gather their food. First of all, what that did was made poor people do what for their food? Oh, what a thought. You mean you have to work to get something? Absolutely. Get whatever you want. It's out in the field. No Section 8. Well, maybe 8 sections of the field. The first fruits of all crops belong to Jehovah in recognition for his being the giver of all good things. So the first sheaf or whatever you were reaping was gathered together. It was given as a sacrifice and offering to the Lord. And usually your first fruits were considered some of your best stuff. I'm not a farmer, so I don't know how that works. The fruit of the orchard was not eaten for the first 3 years. On the 4th year, the produce was consecrated to God. The first eating by men was the 5th year. The first eating of a vineyard, the fruits of a vineyard, was the 5th year. Well, then after that, it was considered a viable crop. It was consecrated to God, set aside. So it became raisins at that point. What? Yeah, we'd probably go to feed the Levites, for Levites to make their ceremonial wines and stuff like that, which is probably Mogan David, see? What? Yeah, when it was initial. Well, again, every 7th year, the crops were destroyed and started over, so you only had 2 good years of wine for a wine season. Yeah, that's another thing you would do. I don't know. I'm not a guy. I really don't know. To me, to let them sit for a year, you could. No. But for grapevines, I don't know. I would think if laying undone, they'd have to. Grapevines hit the ground, they're dying. So I don't know. Go ahead. Yeah, but I'm saying I don't know what would. Yeah, but I don't know what would happen after that was done to the vines. Would they have to replant starting the first cycle of 7 over again? I don't know. So, yeah, so a good vineyard and God's doing the produce, you can probably make yourself a killing for 2 years. I don't know. You're asking me something that we'd have to meticulously look at. Huh? Would wine go bad? Wine's supposed to go bad. Yeah, that's what Nicole said. So the faithful Jew had an opportunity to live every moment of every day as unto the Lord. Think of the whole system was an agro-society. We didn't go to Walmart to get our food. We'd have to go out. All of us would be doing some kind of cultivating or that kind of thing every day. And from this, there would not only be rich fruit from the soil, but in the soul as well. There would not only be rich fruit from the soil, but in the soul as well. Now, with that in mind, let's go back to Ruth 2:1, and now we're going to have some fun with some words. I'll tell you something, I haven't been so excited about a set of words when I ran into these words that's so misinterpreted. Now, Naomi had a kinsman. Now, first of all, the word kinsman here is moda, M-O-D-A, moda, or moda, whichever way you want to pronounce it, M-O-D-A. It just means a relative. It is not the kinsman redeemer. It's just saying, hey, the author here is saying, hey, we're going to pull some little things and tell you how this story starts coming about. This is how the story unfolds, kind of thing. And just happened that Naomi gets back from this 10-plus year hiatus to Moab, comes back without her husband, without her sons, in a state that's not a happy one. How's that? And she comes back with a Moabite girl, and they're destitute. They have nobody, but they do. By the way, that's what the author's saying. She has a relative. Forgot to tell you about that at the beginning of the story. Because it wasn't really relevant, but now it is. And the Levirate custom is being brought up here. That there is an ability for even Naomi at this particular point that she could be taken care of. Not married, because we don't know in other words, it says, there was a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth. So this was a relative, of her husband. Could be a cousin, could be a brother, could be a second cousin, could be a nephew, could be I don't know what it is. So we don't know. The age is not relevant. All we know is it is a relative. That's what. But what is important? What? Yeah, maybe. I would go with more with Mark because she might have known she had this guy named Boaz, but after 10 years she don't know who lived. Remember, there's a famine in the land when she's left, and when you leave a famine, remember we discussed famine was a discipline from God, whether it came from war or it came from drought, whatever it came from, it was a discipline from God. That's how it was looked at. From famine, people do die. So when she's coming back, but what I don't like to do is making too many subjective ideas, what might be, who, what. I just want to go with what the text has. Like, I think it's more important.
It does show that she was, she thought that God was making her suffer, so again, she didn't know. She lost her husband, two sons, so she didn't know.
Well, she wasn't aware of the blessings right in front of her. Because not relative. We're going on chapter 2, verse 1. We don't know anything past that. No. What Naomi's looking at is the consequences of what's happened. She does not care what's in front of her. She hasn't really responded to Ruth that well at this particular point. Up until verse 1. That's all we're looking at. Okay? Please bear with me. Because what you're doing is, you got the end of the story. Most of us are very familiar with the story. If you do that, you're going to get... What we're looking at right now is Naomi, and all the author's telling you is that Naomi had a relative, not that Naomi was aware of it or it mattered. I don't know. Because right at this moment, all it's telling us is about this man, and this focus shifts to a man of great wealth. Let me give you this, and I think your side notes may say a mighty, valiant man. Some side notes. I'm going to go with the Hebrew, totally. Now, there's variant spellings. Aish, Gabor, Hayel. I-Y-S-H or I-S-H, depends on what you look at. I like I-S-H, but I saw I-Y-S-H. Gabor, G-I-B-B-O-R, Hayel, C-H-A-Y-I-L. You must take this down. I'll tell you why in about 3 weeks. But you must take this down. It says a mighty man of wealth. And at this particular moment, if you're looking at Naomi and you're thinking of Ruth, that's the two women, and they have, according to the NASB, a kinsman who has great wealth. And the first thing you look at is, how can we mooch off this guy? And that's not even part of the story. Because, first of all, it's a bad interpretation. What does yours say? I'm just curious. Closer. But still got a problem. I like that better, but it's still not close. First of all, let's make this easy. This is Ish. Ish is man. Yes. Possibly. Let me give you all the definitions. You put it together. I do like the NIV better, though, than the NASB. Possibly. Let me give you the translation. You guys put it together. Gabor means strong, mighty, valiant, brave. Did I say anything about money yet? Okay. It means strong, mighty, valiant, brave. Chayel. Strength, might, moral worthiness. Look with me, just before we get what it means, Joshua 6:12. Joshua chapter 6, verse 12. Judges 6:12. I lost the verse in Joshua. I'll find it. Judges 6:12. To what? Yeah. He's in the wrong place too. It's Gideon. He's lost. Judges 6:12. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to Gideon, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." The same words. Courageous warrior. Ish Gabor Hayel. What did you say? Sounds like you're talking like a Muppet. Ish Gabor Hayel. Actually, I don't think Ish is there in this particular one, but all that means is man. All it's identifying is he's a man. Man's man. In this particular case, Gideon's not really a man's man. Not my I had one in Joshua, and I can't. Oh, I see why. I found it. Joshua 2. Or 6:2. Joshua chapter 6, verse 2. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hands with its kings and the Gabor Hayels." What does it say? Valiant warriors. Pardon me? Joshua 6:2. Is that what you asked? Joshua 6:2. Again, I don't know what the NIV... I'm just curious. The NIV says what? Fighting men. Okay, now, putting these things together, this is how we do Bible study. I gave you what the words meant. I gave you two other places that the word appears. Tell me what it means now. I don't care how expanded you want to go. Just tell me. Go ahead. Okay, what? But he's not a valiant warrior because right now we know he is a farmer from the story. It's kind of hard. What are you going to do? Beat up? Can't. I'm not trying to. Don't think so big. Make it like. Okay, good, but I want. That's good. What did you say? I like that too. How about a man's man? I mean, he's a man's man. When he look, we're going to look through the story. We made a few observations already. He was very courteous to his employees, yet they knew he was the employer. Okay? He took care of the crops. He came in. He did what he had to do. We know from the story later, he does what's necessary every step of the way. When Ruth later throws herself at him to say, "Marry me," he says, "I can't. There's someone closer." Where most guys would say, "All right, no problem." He's very, very noble. So put it in your own words that I put down, and this is really hard to do, that I put down, he was a man of standing. I like the NIV. I can't go away from that. He was a man of standing. In society, maybe in wars, was there wars? I don't know. They were always fighting at this particular time. Read, I really feel, we looked at Judges 6:12. I feel if the story of Ruth falls in that time period, and Joshua went with a bunch of men to fight, and God cut down the men, and went with a bunch, and God, so he ended up with 300. Could Boaz be one of the three? Could be. This is pure speculation. But didn't it say Gideon was a mighty man? Gideon was a Gabor Hayel, and then now in Ruth it says, so is Boaz. Just don't preach it. But when the words are used, it may be the same time period. And we looked at Gideon. He fought when he had to, and he farmed when he had to, and hid when he had to. No. See, it doesn't preach well all the time. But what it does say, go back to Ruth. And I think what we're missing is the big picture. Sometimes when we start reading things, we want to know, solve all our little curiosities and what's going on in the background. But the big picture is this. The big picture is this. God never deserted Naomi. Boaz was still alive. And again, my belief is Boaz was probably the only one of this type left. You know, to find a true man of God like this, a true man of standing, it's not married, yeah. Oh, you're single? You know? I mean, it's unheard of. And we don't even, we'll see that in a minute. Verse 2. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field," coincidentally Boaz's field, "and glean among the ears of the grain." Actually, I don't believe she went to his field first, just to let you know. Well, I'll explain it to you in a minute. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I might find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Remember, first of all, what is Ruth doing? I got to say this because we are too easy society that we go out to Okay, and people take that. So I can go out there and pick and sweat and smell like stench, and some guy will find me really attractive. I don't think that works. See, what she's saying is, and so I want you to be honest with the text, what it says. She's poor. And the poor allows people to do what? Glean. Now, the way field was, for instance, let's say this whole property was a field. Okay? Or bigger than this property. Think of this whole property all the way to Kingman, all the way down. Just bear with me. It's not owned by one person. It's a field that people pick out stakes and make their fields in. So Naomi might have walked to this quadrant and started picking and threw her out. She walked to this quadrant and threw her out. And the quadrant, or wherever the section she got to, was Boaz's, who didn't have the corners picked. And the guys had no problem with her doing it. And she found favor in that owner's eyes. What is favor? Did she deserve to get any food? No. What if the guy wasn't obeying God and didn't leave the corners cut? She couldn't find food. Wait. You're taking my fire. Okay? So when she get in the field, she still had to be let to glean. Even though, listen, this is important, even though the law of God required you to leave your corners uncut and let people just pick, people could stop you. So you had to find some kind of favor in the owner's eyes. What?
I'll take it one step further.
Go ahead.
That was right at the beginning of the verse. She was a Moabite. She probably didn't have any rights under the law. So she really didn't know, because in the Levitical law it had basically that sojourners in the land.
Yes. Yes. We'll get to that. I got it written down. Leviticus 19. We're going to go there in a second. Okay. Since we did that. That's why she needed to find favor. Okay, Leviticus 19. But she's not on a manhunt. Leviticus 19. Where were you at, Nicole? What were you reading? Oh, no. Okay, because we're going to go to the verse in a minute. Leviticus 19:9. Wow, see, it agrees with me. Now, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, neither shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Nor shall you glean the vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 24. Deuteronomy 24. You know, this is a surprise to you all. I didn't get halfway to where I wanted to go. Deuteronomy 24. You guys are testing me. Deuteronomy 24:19. But listen, if there's anything from tonight, and I will repeat it probably 800 times, remember that phrase, Ish Gabor Hayel. Remember, write it somewhere in the sideline of your Bible, the top of your Bible. Not the English, you need the Hebrew. Because you'll lose it in the Hebrew when we get to it later. You won't get this. The play on words is phenomenal. And I'm going to leave you baited with that. Deuteronomy 24:19. When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive tree, because it's been bad, you shall not go over the plows again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, for the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not go over it again. It shall be for your alien, for your orphan, and for your widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I am commanding you to do this thing. You were going to say something, Kevin?
Where you have alien, I have resident order.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
No. Right now she's it's kind of interesting. Ruth was perfectly at home in Moab. She didn't have anything to worry about. And when on the trek back, Naomi looks at her and says, Go to your family, go to your land. And now you see her pictured where she's trying to find favor and gather food. And I'm going to tell you something. Go back to Ruth chapter 2. First of all, I want you to understand what they did, though. By doing what they did with their fields, they made it very easy for someone to gather. Remember, the way it's working is the guy's got, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those sickles. And they're out there going, and behind them is the women gathering this thing and tying it up, and gathering the thing and tying it up. And behind them is there's guys schlepping these things back. Or women. Okay, so there's like three sets of people doing work. And if they forget one of those things already tied, guess who they are? It's for the poor. It's already put together. Hey, that's cool. It's mine. You dropped it. But here's the key. Go back. This is so important. You guys, I gotta, you know what the worst part is? I gotta remind you over and over again. Judges 21:25. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes, but Boaz. She wanted to find favor. Listen to this. Coinkydink. Naomi's got a relative. The relative's got a land. The land is where Ruth has ended up gleaning from, who's the man who is obeying the Lord, probably the only one. Because according to Judges 21:25, everyone was doing right in their own eyes. Which means they're not going to obey the law. They sure ain't going to have no Moabite painted about woman picking from their crop. Get out. But she found favor. She was grace. She got what she didn't deserve. Isn't that funny? Isn't that the gospel in a nutshell? Think about the gospel. You're not teaching. You're not getting rewarded. The poor did what to earn this? You know, when we talk about the gospel, I got to do something to be saved. What did Ruth do to be saved, to at this point get graced? Nothing. He doesn't even know who she is. Yeah, that's a good possibility. And he, as a field owner, even though he says, you know, it's fine for people to pick on my land, but not her. She's a Moabite. That's an alien. That's not one of our people. That's not a godly person. That's not a Christian. What are they doing out here? So I want you to tie all this together. Ruth chapter 2, verse 3. I guess this is where we're going to end this evening. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come upon a portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. It's kind of interesting because Jesus says, the poor you will always have with me. So people are trying to get rid of the poor and trying to do everything for the poor. They're basically breaking every biblical rule. There's rules set up to have what to do with the poor, but we can't erase poor people. But I want you to understand something. When God set up the system, He knew there would be poor people and they had to take care of them. Isn't that interesting? But what would they have to do to be taken care of? They would still have to use that 4-letter word. They'd have to work. And what does the Thessalonians say? If a man doesn't work, he shall not what? Eat. Isn't that correct? What a vicious thing to say to me. You mean I have to do something to get this? Now, I want to just finish. Give me 2 minutes. This word just drives me nuts. She happened. Now, the NASB says she happened to come. The NIV says, as it turned out, the King James says, her hap was too light. It literally says, and it happened, her chance chanced. I mean, either way you want to put it. It happened, her chance, or her chance chanced. The author is building now. I want you to explain to you what this means when somebody says it this way. Because the author is building a beautiful puzzle using intriguing words. God's hesed love, his love for Ruth and for us, and the same thing, his providential action is in work here. In other words, God's behind the scenes doing things. What is Ruth doing? Is she controlling any circumstances? She's just doing what she has to do. She has to go eat. She has to go glean in a field. In plain English, put it this way. In plain English, because we're dealing with the Hebrew, God takes everyday experiences, adds them together, and man calls them coincidence, or a lucky event, or happenstance, or a chance meeting, and the Bible says God's in control. So call it what you... Here's what Leon Morris said. I love this. Man do not control events, but the hand of God is behind them as He works out His purpose. There's not an event in your life you can control. You cannot make anything different. Now you can do things differently. In other words, obey God or not obey God. You understand what I'm saying? In this particular instance, what could Ruth have done different? Nothing. She needed to eat. I'm sorry. Yeah, she could have sat at time, stayed, and then she would have what? Starved to death, and the story wouldn't be at the bottom. It'd be Brenda instead. Naomi is bitter. Listen to this. Does she even go with Ruth to glean? I was waiting for somebody to say that. When we did the observations, remember? Ruth made a decision to go on her own, and Naomi said, it's a good idea, let me go with you. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I love my mother-in-law, but Lizzie decides to go somewhere, she's attached to him. They both go places together. They love to do things together. Here's a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, but it's the same situation, they're friendly. Why didn't she at least go? There's nowhere that says Naomi's incapable of going. She just made a trek from Moab to Bethlehem. A 50-mile walk. So, doesn't. Yeah, but I mean, could you imagine a 50-mile walk and she's doing one of these? No, she's walking with her 50 miles. She can't go out in the fields and reap. Now, wait, one last thing, and we'll begin in verse 4 next week. God works it so Ruth ends up in the field of a relative of Naomi's husband, and we call that... No, we don't. Thank you. We call that God's providence. God is in control of this beautiful love story and puts it perfectly together because He is an Ish Gabor Hayel in a time when everyone was doing right in their own eyes. One man stood out. And God said, that's the man that I want Ruth to marry, to conceive Obed, who conceives Jesse, who conceives David. Let's close. Father God, we thank You for this time and seeing that Your hand is upon even the littlest events of a woman from Moab gleaning in the fields. And Father, in this picture of this beautiful love story, You're so much involved because You first loved us. In Your name, amen.